Welcome everyone to AAS Town Hall, our inaugural meeting here on academic surgery in the time of COVID-19. And the focus of our discussion today is on how to optimize your research during the pandemic. So my name is Mio Kitano. I am a surgical oncologist at the University of Texas Health San Antonio, and it's an honor to be one of the moderators for this session. And all the questions will be addressed at the end. And also, please, the panelists, please keep your mic off when you're not speaking. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lillian Erdahl. I am a breast and general surgeon at the University of Iowa, and I am really looking forward to our talk tonight. First, Dr. Kitano is going to introduce the presenters, and then I'll give you an overview of the topics tonight.
Okay, so our first speaker is Dr. Keswani, and he's a professor of surgery, pediatrics, and obstetrics and gynecology at the Baylor College of Medicine and the director of surgical research at Texas Children's Hospital. He is also the surgical co-director of the Texas Children's Fetal Center. And he has been fully funded by the NIH for the last 10 years and has an active basic science lab that focuses on regenerative tissue repair. And Dr. Moria is a surgical oncologist and a health services quality improvement and health policy researcher at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine. He is also the vice chair of quality in the Department of Surgery and the John B. Murphy Professor of Surgery. His clinical practice is focused on melanoma and sarcoma, and he's the director of the Surgical Outcomes and Quality Improvement Center of Northwestern University, a center of 40 faculty and staff focused on national, regional, and local quality improvement research and practice initiatives. He is the director of 56 Hospital Illinois Surgical Quality Improvement Collaborative and PI of the 151 FIRST trial. And he has numerous publications and many other accomplishments. And Dr. Wall is an abdominal transplantation transplant surgeon and bioethicist at Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas and an adjunct associate professor at Texas A&M Medical School. Her research focuses on ethics in research and transplantation using qualitative methodology. And lastly, Dr. Bankhead Kendall is a surgical critical care fellow at the Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, which has admitted more than 1,000 patients for COVID-19 management since the beginning of the pandemic. She completed her general surgery training at the University of Texas in Austin and will soon join the Division of Acute Care and Trauma Surgery at Texas Tech University. She is one of the founding members of the Global CovidSurg Dissemination Committee and is actively involved in a wide array of COVID-19 research at MGH.
So our talks will start off with Dr. Keswani talking about optimizing basic and translational research during the pandemic and some of the challenges and opportunities. Then we'll move on to Dr. Moria telling us about optimizing health services research during this time. Dr. Wall will talk about research ethics related to COVID-19 in particular. And then Dr. Bankhead Kendall will tell us about the opportunities for research and collaboration for research, including the CovidSurg global opportunities. And again, we'll take questions at the end. You can submit them through the question and answer function so that you don't lose track of your question, but we will hold them to the end. And so we'll have Dr. Kitano stop sharing her screen and Dr. Keswani will get started.
Yeah, Dr. Keswani, yeah, you were muted for a second.
Sorry, thank you. Sorry, I apologize about that. All right. So, you know, as surgeons, we are uniquely suited to deal with disasters. And I think all of us have either been through hurricanes and floods and what have you. But this particular pandemic has its unique challenges. As somebody that's been through Katrina, Harvey, it definitely is interesting because it's on a different scale. Certainly when you're in one part of the country and that's what's affected, you get those resources, but now you're dealing with resources that are limited, that have to be divided for the whole country. Interestingly, that the infrastructure itself. Wait.
Dr. Kiswani, sorry to interrupt.
So-
But your presentation, for some reason, it fell off the share screen.
I apologize. How's that? Why is that?
I can share I have your presentation, so I can share that from my end.
Give me one second. Just see. Sorry about that.
Real-time example of navigating the challenges.
That's right. How's that?
Yeah, we can see
All
it
right.
now.
Perfect. Sorry. So as I was saying, it's surgeons we're used to dealing with disasters. This one particularly is interesting because the scale of it and what there's a set amount of resources and we have to deal with that. Interestingly, the infrastructure is intact, but we don't know what's going to happen to the supply lines as it applies to research. And I think when things open up, that will remain to be seen. We've certainly seen what has happened with PPE. And the last thing is personal health. I mean, sometimes you have a disaster and some people are hurt and some people aren't, but clearly everybody has an element of personal safety, no matter whether you're young, old, sick or not, and people are gonna have to be challenged with that. So those are just some of the things I think that are challenges for all aspects of surgery, aspects of life, I guess. But specifically, what we're trying to focus on is how these things kind of challenge basic translational research, and the focus of my talk is really looking at what the impact of COVID-19 is on this type of research and what strategies we can develop to promote it and optimize the situation that we're in. So to start to answer this question, we developed a survey of AAS ASUS members. It was designed by both the research committees of each organization. We identified some demographics challenges and strategies in line of the pandemic. And because time is such an essence in how people are thinking, just to tell you, this was circulated on April 6th to the 10th. We had over 300 responses, and obviously this just got done. And so this is a very preliminary analysis, but I wanted to share with you what our colleagues are thinking. So in this cohort, and of course, leave it to the basic scientists to have a bunch of data. But in this cohort, we had almost equal representation from department chairs and division chiefs, senior faculty, junior faculty, and trainees. All the major specialties were represented. All the different types of research, of course, mainly basic translational outcomes. Interestingly, the majority of people that answered the survey were funded. And if you actually take away the trainees, you can see this is probably some more of let's say the hardcore researchers that have, or to say successful researchers that have been funded. And then of course, as consistent with most of the surgical enterprises, smaller labs, less than 10, constituted almost 90%. So not surprisingly, when you ask how did the impact of COVID-19 affect their research productivity, the majority of people were very negative, with the middle point being no impact. But I showed this slide because obviously it's obvious, but there are some people that certainly have found to be glass half full and have seen some of the positives. And I want to get, hopefully at the end, we can focus on some of those. When we look specifically at basic translational research, when we ask the questions about impact on cell lines and tissue specimens, the majority of people said it didn't really have an impact. And I think that's mainly because these things can be either frozen away or kept, what have you. But really where we've seen the most major impact is when it comes to animal work. And when you talk about the impact on the animal colony, that is over 80% said there was an impact. And the way that manifests is over half the people said they were told by their institution to wean their colony. And when you look at what percentage they were weaning by, you're looking anywhere from 50% being the most common, but up to 100%. So people are being asked to take some of their most valuable assets and certainly not obviate them, but at least minimize them. And I think that was partly because of the thought process of PPE, as well as the labor force that's required to maintain this precious resource. I put this in for Dr. Bill Moria, who will be speaking next. This was the impact on clinical research, because it wasn't just the basic translational scientists. It is also clinical trial enrollment. If you look at the majority of people have had to stop enrolling in their clinical trials, and that's obviously had a major impact. And Dr. Bill Moria is going to address more of that after this talk. Well, we can't get away from the financial impact. Everybody has heard how their hospital has taken a hit, and it's certainly true in basic and translational research. You know, we're lucky at the Baylor College of Medicine to have a department of surgery that's led by Scott Lemire, and he actually was the one who really kind of started cluing me in that we need to be looking at the financial aspects of this. And so when we asked this question, you know, what about, do you feel like you're getting the guidance you need on the financial impact? You know, most people said no, and I think this is a real opportunity for the AAS and the SUS to provide some clarity, because I don't think people are necessarily getting what they need. And this is truly evidenced by the fact that if you ask them, those same people, are you documenting your losses? Are you showing what you're doing? 89% said no. And actually, when I've asked this question to a lot of people, they didn't even know why I was asking the question. And so I think this is important, because at some point, there may be an opportunity for us to recoup some of these. And so understanding the financial impact and what your specific financial impact is very important. Now, doing that, as you know, like when you do your taxes at the end of the year, it's never as good as when you do them like as you're going along. So with that being said, documenting your losses will be more accurate, and you probably stand to have a better financial remuneration if you can do that. So when we move on to the productivity, we talk about, can people be as productive as they think, as they want to be, as one expects. People certainly felt less productive than they were before, but again, there's a population that definitely feels like they can be even more productive. You have 2% being most productive compared now that COVID is there, and we'll get to maybe some of why that is. But those solutions of how those people are being productive, or how do you maintain some kind of communication, mostly is via remote team interaction. We all know Zoom now, and email, but there's other things like electronic lab notebooks, social media, alternatives such as Slack. We use Slack in our lab to talk to people and communicate with each other beyond text, so that people know what exactly what we're doing. And of course, digital seminars like this, I think, are very important and are a source of education. And it's not just, well, as you know, telecommuting has changed your clinical practice. It's certainly going to change the laboratory practice as well. And 62% said, that their perspective on working from home has certainly changed. And at least in the laboratory setting, people would encourage more telecommuting, or at least think about it. That's probably a much higher number than if we would have said, hey, would you let your lab members telecommute, 3 months ago? Probably that number would be probably 5 or 10%, if that. When we talk about the productivity, what people have really been using, I think this is probably the people that are in that other end of the right side of the scale. I think people have really focused on grant writing and focusing on the data that you have and the manuscripts that you can generate. And also diversifying the type of research. We do mainly cell and animal work, but we had been getting into some of the more genomics, proteomics, and so we have a sea of mass data, and that's something that we're gearing more towards that analysis. So finding other ways to do that, and I think, of course, in getting new collaborators, people that you didn't necessarily think would collaborate with before probably would have a better chance of doing it now. And, no story has to, end on a bad note. We have to end on some positivity. Has there been an unexpected silver lining to all of this? And in this survey, a lot of people had commented on the fact, there was more time with the kids. I think that's true. This is a time we'll never have again, especially as surgeons. But we have had more time to write grants and more time to write manuscripts. And when we finally put this data together, you'll see the other, because the other is the 9% of other is worth reading this manuscript when it finally comes out, because it's pretty funny. But the initial survey summary of the survey is that the majority of researchers have certainly been negatively impacted, and that animal research is similarly disproportionately impacted by the COVID-19. And I think that's, like I said, related to the PPE and the labor issues. Significant financial impact is happening, but really, at least from the survey, the majority are not getting the guidance to navigate these issues. But we need to find innovative solutions to optimize remote work, and I think that's what's been keeping people at least afloat for now. And certainly there are some silver linings there. So I'll start to end it and say, so what are the next steps? What are we going to do from here? And I think that as a group of us, we started thinking about kind of putting something out there so we can guide ourselves, guide our lab members, and of course guide other investigators on how they can optimize these challenges. And so I'll just take them. These are basically, if you can sum up all the things that we've looked at, the 4 challenges that we're facing. Certainly the biggest one is, I think, financial. And I think that in this time that you have reviewing budgets and having discussions with your leadership to see where you are, hospitals are losing money, what their commitment to your lab is, what their commitment to your research enterprise, I think is something that you need to do. If you have questions about your NIH funding or other funding, reaching out to your PO to make sure that there's nothing there and how you use it. There's many webinars on how you navigate the COVID era with your NIH awards. Documenting all your lab losses as they occur, and of course, I would personally suggest an aggressive plan for submitting new grants and new funding mechanisms to make sure that you can weather the storm. From the research side, I think we can all agree that optimizing the web-based tools to promote productivity has been real positive. Diversifying your research portfolio, pursuing new collaborations, old collaborations. Allowing personnel to start new in vitro experiments as things starting to ramp up, something that we're starting to see in Texas, and I'm sure as it spreads around the country, God willing, that we have no issues, that this is a great place to start because you don't have to wait for the mouse colonies to go. But those, of course, experiments that will consume a lot of PPE are probably still discouraged in all senses. And then, of course, reconstituting your mouse colonies if you were one of those institutions that ended up having to sacrifice them. From the supply line and the lab space, having managing your own personal supply chain in your lab, things that I think that we took for granted, RNA extraction, et cetera, may not be so for granted anymore. And I think that you better make sure that if you need it, that you're going to need it. You should order it now and get in line. Those perishables and supplies, I think, are going to be an issue. And we have to be aware of the supply chain. Modifying your lab space to facilitate ventilation, having adequate PPE, alcohol everywhere, sanitizer, et cetera, to make your people feel safe, and it being a safe environment, I think, is key. And then implementing new rules for common spaces. I mean, any scientific endeavor is usually an endeavor of a team, and part of that is speaking and collaborating, and that's going to have to change a little bit. And then, of course, the number one thing, and maybe this should have been on top, is the personal health of the people that work for us, with us, above us, whoever that is. But minimizing the number of individuals who are present at any given time in your lab space, whether that be having shifts, something we're trying, alternating days or even weekend opportunities. Being mindful of people that have childcare constraints at home or have other comorbidities. I think those people need to have some other remote work plans for their own safety. And then, of course, the safety measures that we all know, the 6 feet in masking policy per your institution. And I would just say it's a good time to review all their safety protocols. It's something that we have done in the interim that we've had down. So I'll end it there. Hopefully I stay close to on time. And sorry for the technical difficulty. And thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Keswani. So now we'll move on to Dr. Billamoria. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A at the bottom of your webinar screen, and we will answer some questions at the end.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. Well, thanks for this opportunity, Lily and Mio. Great idea to put this together. I congratulate you. And I love seeing, 100+ participants on here, so that's great. I'll talk a little bit, Sandeep did a great job summarizing the impact. I'll talk a little bit about health services research and our team, and use some of the examples that we've had to show where we've struggled and where we've had some opportunities. And so at first, I wasn't a huge proponent of work from home generally. We're such a collaborative group, and we benefit so much from being able to pop up and talk to each other and collaborate that we'd had a couple people try working from home in the past, and they voluntarily relinquished it because they realized how collaborative we were and that it didn't work for them. So we hadn't had great experiences with it, so I was a little nervous about this. We have an administrative director who saw what was coming and prepared us really well, and had gotten all the IT stuff in order. So once we went to work from home, it was slow at first, and I was starting to wonder what had happened. All of a sudden my email traffic was down to almost nothing on the research side. I had plenty to do with COVID-related administrative duties, but all of a sudden the papers, the abstracts, the specific games pages had come to sort of a halt. And I think it took people just a couple weeks to figure out how to work from home and how to integrate and to get over the stress of really this massive change. Being at home with, hooligans who are trying to do e-learning and whatnot. So certainly that was the case in our household. So I can understand that. But now it has really picked up. And I would say my list of things to get through is deeper than it's ever been. So papers, specific games pages, all sorts of things, commentaries, and people are, working fast. Some of them are very timely topics related to COVID work. So you got to turn them around quickly. We've had a significant impact on some of our research, though. You can imagine that right now, for the second trial, which is working on resident well-being, people really aren't in a space to be doing implementing new initiatives, for example, right? So a lot of that work is about how do we get programs to improve resident well-being and give them suggestions and give them their data back. That's not top of mind. Similarly, in our Illinois Quality Collaborative, we have 56 hospitals, which we work with on doing quality improvement and studying that. Doing innovation is really not top of mind for these places. They're just trying to hang on. And so a lot of that work is stalled as well. And certainly within our health system, we run the Quality Innovation Center for the health system. Nobody wants to hear from us. And in fact, we repurposed all of our folks to do COVID work. Innovation becomes a very end of the line sort of thing when you're in crisis. And so we found ways to repurpose and make ourselves useful. I did staffing for COVID. We've had other folks on the team do educational modules. We're good at making modules and training modules on QI. So we just converted it to doing work for COVID. And so the team did great work on that. And Tony Yang from our group led a great initiative on that. The opportunities have been there as well, and it's not just extra time to write grants and think about papers and write all the things that you intended to write. We've certainly done that. I wrote a paper that I had been putting off for 6 years. Not usually my style to procrastinate that long, but I got the Dinosaur Award from our group for having gotten that done. But we have been able to take advantage. And Yaron, who's the co-PI of the second trial, had the foresight pretty early on to realize that residency programs were going to go through a lot, and we should figure out what was happening with them. And start learning from their experiences with managing the COVID. And so she started, pulling information and pulling people together and figuring out how programs are adapting to that. And so that led to some rich work and will lead to rich work. So she was able to take advantage of what was going on to learn about well-being in crisis. And so hopefully that will help the country as we go forward. In our other work in the state collaborative, we realized nobody wanted to hear from us in terms of doing, VTE work or implementing a protocol for ERAS in, breast surgery or something else. But they did want to talk about COVID-related work. And so we're pulling them together, particularly now as we have a little time to breathe around reactivation and how do we restart surgery. One of my roles was handling staffing for the ER, ICUs, and the wards across our health system for COVID-related patients. And I felt like I was, doing this on my own. And I'm sure there was a me in every other academic medical center, doing the exact same thing. But unlike most other things, we didn't have the time to really collaborate and learn from each other. Now with reactivation, we do have that time. And so we're really taking advantage and studying that, turning that opportunity to collaborate into research as we usually do. We've also gone after new funding. There's a lot of COVID funding out there, right? So particularly in our space, we have a lot of opportunities. So one of the opportunities, again, was around bringing people together and creating collaboratives around how to handle COVID-related stresses, how to reactivate your system. So there was an announcement for that. So we went after that. We're also doing some work. Dave Odell in our group and Ryan Mirko have been doing telehealth work for the last couple of years, and we were well poised to obviously take advantage of some of the telehealth work. We don't do typical telehealth work. We kind of do asynchronous work that is a little different. So, you know, they've submitted grants very quickly and taken advantage of that. And their work really is now ready to, you know, it was being done in small areas across the health system. Now it'll spread widely. And so taking advantage of those research opportunities has been great. I think you can't do the extreme though. You can't go and chase money just because it's there. And I've seen a couple of people talk about that. You know, we don't know anything about COVID testing and which platform to use and looking at sensitivity and specificity. That is not the money we should be going after just because it's there. And, you know, in one grant recently, so nobody applied for it. You know, an institutional grant was left unapplied for it. So we thought we might go after it, but it had nothing to do with us. So I don't think that is wise. Don't just chase money because it's there. I think the other thing is, you know, we were talking about local hospital research. We do a ton of work within our health system. And like I said, they don't really want to hear from us now. And in fact, you have to be doubly careful. Anything you send right now, whether on your research front, particularly with related to health services and quality research, where you're doing implementation work, if you send things now to health system leaders, department chairs, practicing physicians, you're going to seem tone deaf, right? So you think that people might be ready to hear about it. They're probably not. It's really difficult right now. And you don't want to appear to be that person who's not sensitive to everything that they're going through. And so I think we have to just be comfortable putting some of our work on hold and not putting them off. And so we're being really careful about not bothering our hospitals in the health system or in the collaborative at all. Again, it has been a very good time to write papers and grants once people get into the work, you know, get into the routine. And I think, you know, lastly, I'll just talk a little bit about taking care of your team. You know, our administrative director, Karen, had the foresight to get laptops and VPNs well, you know, a few weeks ahead of us going to work from home. So that really helped. It still took some time to really help everybody figure out their technological issues. We can do most of our work from home, unlike a lab. We even offered, you know, we'll ship, you know, a second monitor. You know, everybody was just working off of laptops, and that's kind of tough to do for some of the data analytics or whatnot. So we said, okay, we'll ship a second monitor to you, or you can come in and pick up your own monitor and take it home. And, you know, somebody else said, well, I don't really have a chair. So we, you know, we can work out some of these things. You can come grab your own chair, or we'll ship you one, you know. These little things we can take care of. And so those things make a big difference. I was talking with the director of our Center for Leadership at Northwestern, and he gave us a couple of tips for doing collaborative work from home. He, you know, guides a lot of global companies, so doing collaborative work is natural to him and guiding them on that. And he said, in this area, we should double the number of our usual interactions. If we have a weekly lab meeting, we should go to doing it twice a week, because we've lost all the casual interactions that we had, just being able to pop up and talk to each other across the cubicle or to the next office, or having people pop into our offices. So I think that's been something that a lot of our project teams have done, and it has seemed very successful. I think the other piece is, you know, these days blend together, right? We call it Blur's Day because they can't tell what day it is frequently. And the weeks are going by very quickly in some ways. And so setting goals for your team and your project for you to work toward helps to establish what you want to get done, particularly when in this era where we're going month to month, right? The stay-at-home shelter-in-place order for Illinois just got extended another month. And so I think thinking about things in that 1 month or 2 week block helps us get through it. And that seems to have been very helpful. So overall, I think we've weathered the health services research world of COVID very well. I think there've been opportunities. We've shifted to being able to do a ton of work from home and taking advantage of the opportunities. And so I think we're lucky compared to our lab colleagues, and have been able to make the shift. We've certainly been affected, but we've just reprioritized what we can work on during that time. So thanks again to Mia and Lillian. This was great. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the questions.
Thank you. So we'll move on to Dr. Wall talking about ethics and research.
All right, everyone. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk in this webinar. I'm Dr. Wall. I'm from Baylor in Dallas, and I'm the chair of the ethics committee for AAS, which is how I got this opportunity. So what I'm going to talk about in this brief presentation is just a little background on the historical, legal, and ethical perspectives on research, and then some considerations for both non-COVID trials as well as for COVID research trials. And finally, a brief commentary on some effects on academic advancement and the ethical issues surrounding that. So I just want to start with a very important historical document, which is Henry Beecher's article from JAMA in 1966 on ethics in clinical research. And what this article is about is he picked out 22 ethically questionable research studies in the United States from the prior year and wrote about the specific details of why these were ethically questionable. He had actually found 50 examples, but had to pare it down to 22 for the article. And what he found were ethical questions ranging from withholding known effective therapies, performing invasive procedures that had no potential for benefit, but substantial risks, and also using vulnerable research subjects like institutionalized children for research studies. And the conclusions of his paper, and the reason that I bring it up, they're still very much applicable today. So what he concluded was, number one, journals are responsible for ensuring the ethical conduct of research, of the research that they publish, and they should not publish unethical trials. Consent is essential. Only 2 out of the 50 studies that he identified had explicit documentation of consent. Expected gain must be commensurate with risk. And finally, the end does not justify the means. So studies that are conducted in an unethical manner, no matter what the conclusions are unacceptable and should not be published. So what this article and other similar articles kind of pulled up was that they pushed toward regulation through the National Research Act in 1974, which then led to the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research, who published the Belmont Report, which all of you are familiar with because we all have to do city training. And in this report, we're required to have respect for persons through informed consent, beneficence through the assessment of risks and benefits, and justice through the fair selection of research subjects. And this report, which was just ethical principles and guidelines, was actually put into law through the Common Rule and is now a legal requirement for any federally funded research. So all of us are required to adhere to these ethical principles. Now, the final article I'm going to point out is by Emanuel and colleagues. This is what makes clinical research ethical. And what they say is, yes, the Belmont Report has some necessary things, but it's not sufficient. And so what we need is a little bit more in the way of guidance for the ethical conduct of clinical research. And I would argue that a lot of these points are actually not just clinical research, but any type of research. So you can see the list here. And it makes a lot of sense. It has to have value, validity, fair subject selection, favorable risk-benefit ratio, independent review, informed consent, and respect for potential and enrolled research subjects. So what I thought we could do is take all of these points and apply them to questions that we might have about COVID-related research and non-COVID-related research. So what I have here on this slide is taking each of these points from Emanuel's paper, and I developed some questions around how can we address the ethical benchmarks of non-COVID related research in the setting of a pandemic. And some of these questions have come from this article that I have at the bottom that I would encourage everybody to take a look at. Just got published in Surgery, and it asks the question of, is it ethically appropriate to continue surgical clinical trials during the COVID-19 pandemic? So you all can read these questions, but from a social and scientific value standpoint, the questions are, is the study valuable in the current climate? Does a study utilize limited resources that are needed elsewhere? From a scientific validity standpoint, will COVID skew the results of my study by increasing morbidity and mortality, or by causing significant protocol deviations? From fair subject selection, will it change the availability of the research subjects for my study? Or, and then from a risk-benefit ratio, does the risk of exposure to COVID and the subsequent morbidity and mortality tip the balance of risks to be much greater than the benefits that we expect from our research? From informed consent, does my study prioritize patients in a way that creates undue pressure to participate? So this is something that came up in this, this article at the bottom. Is the only way to get a cancer operation at this point through a clinical trial because of the halt on some on non-urgent operations. From a respect for subjects standpoint, do I need to have a discussion to inform my current subjects about changes with respect to COVID-19 and provide a mechanism for withdrawal if patients want to do that? And do I have a reasonable belief that funding is going to continue to be able to actually complete the study? Finally, from an independent review standpoint, do I have changes to my protocol that I need to have reviewed by my institutional review board? So what I would say is that for non-COVID related studies, we have to recognize that COVID-19 is still going to affect our research studies, even if they have nothing to do with COVID. We need to address the logistical challenges and the ethical challenges that COVID-19 is posing to our research, and we need to continue to utilize the ethical benchmarks that, that we already have to reevaluate ongoing studies and to evaluate studies that are under development through using some of these questions that I've listed in this presentation. Now, from a COVID-related research standpoint, I recognize that not all of us are going to be doing drug trials for COVID, and probably most of us are not going to, but we are all the recipients of this information. And so I thought it would be important to at least go through the same sort of exercise by looking at the contextual features of COVID that are affecting the ethical benchmarks of research on COVID-related therapies. So, for example, heightened emotion and treatment bias are potentially affecting scientific value and validity of the way that research is being designed. For example, not wanting to do placebo-controlled, randomized controlled trials because patients don't want placebos in this situation. They feel like a treatment is better than not a treatment. Fair subject selection, we already know there are disparities in access to care, testing, and treatment. And those disparities may also continue in the selection of subjects for research. From a risk-benefit ratio, there's so many unknowns, it's hard to make a calculus between what the risks and benefits are when we really just don't know a lot about COVID. From an informed consent standpoint, the focus of many of these studies are on the critically ill COVID patients. And so there's a requirement for surrogate consent in many of these situations. And surrogates, as we all know, are not even allowed in the hospital at this point. So we're trying to get surrogate consent over the telephone for patients in these trials. And another issue with no visitors in the hospital means you don't have a bedside advocate for patients in clinical trials, and therefore they may have trouble navigating things like wanting to withdraw from a clinical trial. The final thing is that we do have the sense of urgency that we pointed out multiple times. Journals are trying to crank out manuscripts on COVID-related research, and institutions are trying to do research on COVID. And while yes, it's important to get research out there quickly, we have to realize that by pushing things through more quickly, we can also lose the attention to detail that we typically have in our in research. So what that brings me to are basic conclusions that we need to maintain ethical research standards. We need to be aware of our biases based on emotion and urgency in the time of a pandemic. And just another point is that we need to, I think that journals have an obligation to publish both positive and negative studies because both do have value in the way that we're going to end up treating our patients for COVID. The final thing that I'm going to transition to just quickly is some commentary on what I think is important for us as the AAS to address, and that is promotion and tenure. So we've already talked about how there's going to be major financial consequences to COVID, and that can lead to some funding challenges for investigators. And we may have a limitation in NIH awards and other funding mechanisms as the economy kind of slows down from the pandemic. We've already seen meetings being canceled and speaker engagements being canceled, which means less lines on your CV about the way that you disseminate your research and present your research. And for folks who are going up for tenure for different positions, this is a big deal. So having a consistent way of documenting where meetings and presentations are canceled or changed because of COVID is very important. And then finally, as we've recognized, we all have balancing acts. So we may not be able to be as productive. Some of us are not as productive because of other obligations, either clinical, family, et cetera. And just having that, being able to recognize that we're all kind of trying to balance all these different things. And we may need to change the tenure clock for some individuals because it's hard to get stuff done when you don't have the ability to do the research that you've been doing. So I'll just conclude by saying ethical standards for research should not change during a pandemic. We are going to have an effect from COVID-19 and are already seeing it on research directly related to it, but also unrelated studies. We need to proactively identify and address the ethical challenges to our own research and to research that's being done in our institutions. And finally, I think that the AAS in particular is uniquely able to help with the evaluation of institutional tenure requirements and to help suggest making adjustments that recognize barriers to academic advancement. So thank you all for the opportunity to present.
Thank you, Dr. Wall. So now we're going to close out your screen share and we'll have Dr. Bankhead Kendall talking about CovidSurg. And again, you can ask questions in the Q&A at the bottom and we'll have a few minutes at the end. If we don't get to your questions, we want to be able to follow up and answer them. So don't be afraid to ask a question because you think there's not enough time.
All right. Is that showing up? Well, all right. Okay, so my name is Brittany Bankhead Kendall. Again, I'm a surgical critical care fellow at Massachusetts General. Thank you so much to the moderators and to Dr. Kafrani, my mentor, on giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you about a really cool opportunity right now that is very timely, and that is about CovidSurg. Which is a global opportunity that we all have right now, and specifically about research collaboration with other countries and ourselves in this COVID-19 pandemic. I have nothing to disclose. So CovidSurg itself, I wanted to talk a little bit about how it started and where it came from. So there's a group called Global Surge. It's based out of the NIHR in the UK. And this group does a lot of surgical research across the globe at baseline all the time. And so when the COVID-19 pandemic started, they, like many large consortiums, realized that there was a really big opportunity to collaborate. And so they took to social media and to Twitter and realized really quickly that that was the best way to gain collaboration across the world. And so with this Twitter projection across the globe, we formed what is called the CovidSurg Dissemination Committee. And all of those flags you see represented there, as well as many more, have formed this group in order to go out into the ends of the world and gather patients from everywhere. So the goals of CovidSurg itself is to recognize really this urgent need to understand outcomes, of COVID-19 patients who undergo surgery, and to capture real-world live data and share these international experiences, which will help inform the management of this complex group of patients. Sorry. Let's see. Oh, there we go. So patient recruitment is really important. We've really just decided to capture a broad base of patients with COVID-19 diagnoses. And those diagnoses can range anywhere from 7 days prior to surgery up to 30 days after surgery. The variables that we've been looking at have been somewhat broad, but we've tried to streamline them. As everyone knows, we're all very busy. Data entry is sometimes not on the forefront of our mind with all of our other clinical responsibilities. So the ones you see here are really what we've kind of limited everything to. So demographics and comorbidities. We are looking at the last set of vitals taken before a patient's surgical procedure, a select number of labs, and any imaging done prior to surgery. We're also looking specifically at which procedure they have, anesthesia type, and then the urgency level, looking at non-urgent surgeries versus those that are emergent. We're also looking at some of the medications that have been trialed and researched a little bit, and then perioperative complications, of course, length of stay, and ultimately mortality. As of Monday, these are our statistics so far. Since the end of March, we've recruited 4,464 patients in 52 different countries at 363 hospitals. And I think we were just updated today that that number is now over 5,000, which is really exciting and great. Authorship through CovidSurg. This is obviously at the beginning of my training, something really new and exciting as a collaborative for me. The authorship component is certainly something that's on the forefront of anyone doing research's mind. And so the way that they've found to be the most collaborative is to create this byline called CovidSurg Collaborative. And anyone who is contributing patients is part of this collaborative PubMed indexable, because we just felt like that patient recruitment from as many places as possible was really, really important. This British Journal of Surgery title here was one of the first things that the collaborative put out, not looking at our patient population yet specifically, but just doing a systemic analysis about what was already out there and available. So specifically, Massachusetts General, where I'm at, we are spearheading the United States Collaborative. Our team is made up of our PI, Dr. Kafarani. We've got several co-investigators, a trauma coordinator, our research fellow team. And even though we are trauma and acute care surgery based, I'll emphasize that this CovidSurg Collaborative is across all specialties. It includes urologic procedures, neurosurgery, ortho, everything. So it's definitely not just limited to those that are acute care by any means. Some of the recommendations we've made as hospitals have come to us wanting to become part of CovidSurg is that contacting us really early, we can help you expedite IRBs. We've helped a lot of different hospitals in order to get their patient data updated really, really quick so that we can get all of this information out to everyone and disseminated really quickly. Another thing that we have recommended is using REDCap is what's used for CovidSurg specifically, and creating your own specific REDCap for internal data collection along the same lines as the global one in order to look at hospital-specific variables that your hospital might be interested in later on. We've combined those in our IRBs. Since everything that we're doing globally is fairly broad, that's really been of value for a lot of different hospitals. Other platforms, if you'll go to the website, which I'll show here at the end, other platforms that you'll see listed, which our team isn't necessarily helping spearhead, but will be there so you know how to navigate it, is CovidSurg Cancer, which some of you may have heard of. That cohort is looking at oncologic procedures specifically, both at those who have had surgery during the pandemic as well as those not receiving the standard of care during the pandemic, which is obviously really important. There's also a resource survey looking at both non-urgent surgery cancellations and surgical services, and then a workforce survey looking at sickness protection and task management. So how to get involved, I've listed here both our PI, Dr. Kaparani, myself, and Carrie Breen, who is our coordinator. We put out a USA distribution list and newsletter fairly often to keep everybody abreast of all of the new information, Q&A, and ways that we can help. And then listed there is the website for CovidSurg. There's lots of information about the project, patient recruitment, links to REDCap, and there's also specifically, you can find the USA tab, which I've shown here over on the right, with both MGH's study approval and template application to really help expedite and get your IRB quickly. And that's it.
Well, thank you so much for to all the panelists for the really insightful input from all your standpoint and perspectives. So I would like to address some of the questions that came in. So the first question, I believe this should go to Dr. Bilimoria. So the first person, Joshua Herb, he said, hi, wondering what your thoughts are on submitting non-COVID manuscripts right now. Many journals have said they're prioritizing COVID-related works. Thank you. So Carl, Dr. Bilimoria, could you address that question?
Sure, and others can jump in as well, but I see absolutely no reason to hold anything right now. Push it all out. I think when they say they're prioritizing, they're going to try to have a rapid turnaround on review and on publication. I don't think that means they are unwilling to consider other types. And in fact, we've submitted lots of journal articles recently and gotten nice prompt review, and I think it's been just fine. So I wouldn't hold back. I don't know if any of you other panelists have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the timely review is something that you're seeing because everybody's at home, and so take advantage of that for sure.
Does anybody else have comments on that question? No? Okay, so I'll move on to another question, and this is actually a question that I've gotten from a number of people, and you know, long before this talk, but was brought up to me again today. There's been a lot of discussion on how disparities widen in COVID. So we know that for access to care for our patients, including care for COVID-19. But there's been a lot of talk also about potentially disparities in academic productivity and people being affected disproportionately by the challenges that go along with this. And I think the one that's been most highly publicized has been gender. You know, but I think also you could potentially say if somebody's a critical care surgeon, you know, and they're at a very busy institution, they may not have time to be more academically productive. So I wonder if you can comment on, you know, either theoretical or actual disparities we're seeing in productivity. Anybody?
I'm happy to start. I totally agree, and that's something that I wanted to highlight toward the end of my discussion, because I do think that everybody is in a different situation. So while, you know, as a transplant surgeon, we have our clinical work kind of decreased over the last month. It's starting to pick back up now, but we've been asked to cover acute care surgery. So I'm doing those sorts of shifts. And also, you know, now schools are closed. And so in the other hours of the day that I'm not doing clinical work, I also have homework to do, you know, like a kid to hang out with. So I do think that everybody has different abilities to be productive. And I mean, the other thing to think about is there is some research that is very, that can be continued, and there's some that really can't, either because of the necessity of like resources and PPE and so forth. And so, and it's something that we see in surgery as well, is that, You know, financially, it's not a great thing for a hospital to not be doing operations. Academically, it's not a great thing for us to not be doing research, but it may be better for the institution as a whole, or for your family as a whole, or for your practice as a whole, for that to be kind of on the back burner. And I think we have to recognize that that's okay. And maybe not everybody can be like this incredibly productive person. And if you are somebody who has these barriers, then you need to have that conversation with you know, your leadership and so forth, and say, maybe I'm not going to hit the requirements for tenure because of X, Y, and Z. And we need to be able to accept that as an academic community.
I can speak a little bit about, because I am the critical care surgery, acute care surgery part here, and we are trying to ramp up a lot of our research. But it also, so that is hard, and a time challenge, time crunches. We still have a lot of our surge ICUs open, and we're all very busy. But it comes with the really neat opportunity to see clinically how these patients have evolved. We're able to know which variables we should be looking at. And we're able to really do a lot of collaboration across a lot of disciplines with both home critical care, with our nephrologist, again, globally. So being really busy has had its absolute benefits in clinically knowing what it is that we should be studying because we are seeing it firsthand.
So I asked the team what I should talk about today, and Yaron is always really good at feeding me things. Well, and she said, look, you should talk about this. It'll make you seem really woke. This topic of gender inequality in productivity at this time. So I missed my opportunity to look really good there, but no, I think it's really true. So, you know, there are, I'm sure there are, you know, she was relaying a conversation she had where she was talking to a male surgeon who said, oh my God, so much research must be getting done right now. And then there were two women who are like, yeah, the men are, and, you know, they have, they might be, but, you know, their roles in the household are to, you know, manage the kids. And so, and I can relate to that in our household. So I think we do have to be mindful that not everybody's going to have all this time to write papers and get things done. They're doing far more important things in trying to navigate e-learning, and Zoom calls for 4-year-olds is evidently a thing with ours, at least. So I think we can't just assume that everybody's going to be able to go wild with research during this time.
Yes, I can vouch for that. My children have multiple scheduled Zoom calls. We do gymnastics lessons via Zoom now, except it requires a parent to spot her and help her. So, you know, I'm now a gymnastics coach in addition to all of the other hats, which is, you know, again, I don't, to Dr. Kiswani's point, you know, it also is a gift because I don't normally get to be a participant in that. So, you know, but there's a lot of hats for everybody. And I just appreciated what all the panelists said about the stress on all of the clinicians, on the researchers, and on the patients. So, you know, I think it's important that we all support each other. I think Dr. Kitano has another question from the audience.
So I have a question from Dr. Carrie Lovitz, and I think this question can be answered by both Dr. Villamaria and Dr. Kiswani. So given the stress on the economy secondary to the pandemic, are you concerned that federal funding for current research that are, i.e. already granted, will be at risk? And either or both Dr. Villamaria and Dr. Kiswani can answer that.
I'll chime in on a couple of things. You know, first, of course, the number one thing in research, don't get involved in hearsay. Go straight to the horse's mouth. Go ask your PO and see what they have to say. They're always the best source of information. I think most of them, not all of them, are usually there to help you. And so that's my first comment. I have a couple of anecdotal experiences. One, I was just getting funded right in the middle of the Great Recession, and that, you know, when that was happening, then we certainly were funded when we were funded. And I would say, to make everybody feel at least a little bit better, I mean, we just had an R01 that was not officially funded, but scored well right in the middle of this February, March. And so the funding was supposed to come now. So you would think if they're going to start holding something back, cutting something back, we wouldn't get it, but the NOGA just came this week. So I think that maybe it hasn't hit yet, but at least my experience with the NIH is once it's budgeted, it's usually budgeted. I mean, it's the government. I mean, they don't usually, they'll I think that, of course, future applications are going to be very competitive. So you should put them in ASAP. Next year's budget's going to look a lot different than this year's budget. So, and I have heard, I will engage in the rumor mill. I have heard some mandates of saying that, 15% of all the institute's budgets are supposed to be, topped off and kept aside for COVID research. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but listen, I'll give a plug for research and basic science research. This is the best funding era that we've ever been in. If you're somebody of you're 10 years out or so or less, which is most of the AAS, this is 10 times better than it was I say 10 times, that's exaggeration. It is significantly better, significantly more likely you're going to get funded now. So don't let the COVID thing get in your way. Just keep hammering those grants and you will get funded. I think that's the truth wherever it is. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I wasn't worried about it until Carrie asked that question, but no, I'm kidding. I am not worried about them retracting grant dollars at all. That I think that's a whole different level of problems. I think if that starts happening, our economy is in that's a way worse problem than we had in 2008. So let's see, but I don't that's not out on my realm of possibilities right now. Maybe that's naive, but it is. I think the budgets for next year will be curtailed. I think the pay lines for other non-COVID work will be more competitive just because they'll be shunting more funds to COVID research, COVID-related research. Of course, we can all pray that this goes the way of the first SARS, and it kind of dies out, and all the work that needs to be done for it is no longer needed, and then grant dollars get redirected like they did for that initial one. But that doesn't seem to be the case.
All right, well, thank you so much for to all the panelists. We did put this presentation in a relatively short notice, and this was a really great discussion. And hopefully we'll have another AAS Town Hall in the near future. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
And we are recording, so that was asked earlier, so the video will be available. And Dr. Villamoria will answer your question privately, Dr. Kim, since we ran out of time.
Thank you both. Thank you all. This was really great. Thanks for doing it. Have a great night.
Okay, good night, everyone.
Everyone, good night.
Thank you.